I warmly welcome you to this explanatory video. In part 1 of the explanatory videos on EU's policymaking, I gave you an insight into the different stages of European policymaking and how the different EU institutions are involved and are interacting with each other. In the following explanatory video, we want to find out how decisions are processed and made within the institutions and which key actors are involved. At the beginning of the legislative process is the European Commission with its almost 33,000 employees, including around 20,000 civil servants, who draw up laws in the 23 general directorates and are supported by around 40 specialist agencies and about 815 working groups. Subsequently, the European Parliament, with its 705 members, and the Council of the European Union, the so-called Council of Ministers. The presidency of the Council of Ministers changes every 6 months. The respective Council presidency is supported by the General Secretariat of the Council. Together, they shape European politics and decide together on European laws. The exchange between the actors is very intensive and is not limited to formal procedures. Rather, there are countless meetings in the run-up to a legislative initiative and during the decision-making phase, but also in the phase of implementation and evaluation of existing laws. This also explains the spatial proximity that these institutions occupy in Brussels. The ministries of the member countries are represented by the permanent representatives in Brussels as a kind of liaison office or interface. These are located in the respective embassies of the member countries. Several buildings are available to the actors for their work and for meetings. At the bottom left, you can see the work location of the European Parliament in yellow, and in pink, the buildings which are the buildings where the work of the 20 parliamentary committees take place. In red, in the center, you can see the building complex of the Council of Ministers, where about all 150 working groups come together and the weekly meetings of the permanent representatives take place. The European Commission, in turn, houses its 23 directorate generals in countless buildings all over Brussels. In addition, over 850 committees with national experts in various subject areas meet in these buildings as well in order to provide the Commission with the necessary expertise. The so-called specialist departments in the European Commission work on the instructions of the Directorate Generals and draft any legislative proposal. Directorate Generals are organizing the work of every department around specific policy area. Let's look at an identical example. In the area of working condition, for example, the department is headed by Adam Pokorny. The responsible head of the Director General in the Commission, Employment and Social Rights, is Mr. Joost Korte. Political leadership and responsibility is assumed for 5 years by the commissioner who is proposed by the elected Commission President, in consultation with the heads of government of the 27 member states and elected by the members of the European Parliament in the so-called hearing. In our example, Mr. Nicolas Schmidt from Luxembourg got elected as becoming the Commissioner for Employment and Social Rights. The communication and coordination with the administrative level in the Commission at the level of the Director General is carried out by the Commissioner's Cabinet. In that case, it is Mrs. Santina Bartolesi. The legislative proposal, both by the Commissioner and his cabinet will subsequently be handed over to the General Secretariat of the Commissioner President. As a result, the cabinets of the other commissioners and their directorate generals have 10 days to express their concerns about this legislative proposal. After the deadline, the legislative proposal will be submitted to the Committee of All Commissioners, which is called the College, which meets weekly and therefore will have the final say on the legislative proposal before submitted to the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers. An absolute majority among these 27 commissioners is required to pass the bill. The second important actor actually is the European Parliament. Its 705 members of parliaments from the 27 member states divide the work into 20 parliamentary committees. The European Parliament is divided into 3 locations, with the General Secretariat in Luxembourg, with the General Secretariat in Brussels, which also holds 20 parliamentary committees and 7 party groups, and Strasbourg, on the other hand, where the plenary sessions take place. The Parliament itself is headed in its work by the Presidium of the European Parliament. David Sassoli from Italy currently holds this position as being the President of the European Parliament. He belongs to the S&D group, which is the Socialists and Democrats, and was elected for a 2.5 years period. The President of Parliament is supported and controlled in his work by 14 vice presidents. The work of a member of Parliament is divided as follows per month, as can be seen here on the calendar for 2021. 2 weeks are reserved for the work in the parliamentary committees, and 1 week for the work in the party groups. 4 days for plenary sessions in Strasbourg, as well 2 additional days for voting in Brussels. The rest of the time belongs to work in the national constituencies, as for example town hall meetings, press meetings, public events, and so on. The work in the committees is the core function of parliamentary work. The European Parliament has 20 of those parliamentary committees, in which between 25 and 81 members work together. At the beginning of the legislative period, they elect a committee chairperson for an initial period of 2.5 years. For each legislative proposal to be dealt with, several committees can be entrusted with, whereby it is determined which committee is responsible for the lead and which other committees act in a case of advisory capacity. This is done through opinions that are forwarded to the lead committee. Take the Employment and Social Affairs Committee as an example. This is headed by the chairperson Lucia Doris Nikolsonova from Slovakia. She belongs to the group of European conservatives and reformers. This committee has 53 members. A rapporteur is nominated for every legislative proposal that is discussed in the committee. For example, we can say that the European People's Party actually holds the rapporteur, and on the other hand, to support them in their work, but also to control them, all the other political groups in the European Parliament have the right to appoint a so-called shadow rapporteur. The committee votes with a simple majority. However, this voting result is not binding for the vote in the plenary of all 705 members. The respective rapporteurs and shadow rapporteurs, as well as the respective committee chairperson, then also report to their colleagues in the party groups. A party group is represented differently in the committees. This makes it all the more important for committee members to report to their group colleagues and the group chair. The working meetings in the parliamentary groups usually take place immediately before the plenary sessions, with the aim of informing the parliamentary group colleagues about the votes and to swear them to a common line for voting in the plenary sessions. For example, the chairperson of the group of the European People's Party is Manfred Weber. The national parliamentary group of the ÖVP are also coordinated internally under the direction of their head of delegation. The Austrian head of delegation in the European People's Party is Mrs. Angelika Winzig. Austria has 7 members of parliaments in this party group. 2 of them, Lukas Mandl and Christian Sagatz, also are members of the Parliamentary Committee Employment and Social Affairs. In the party group of the Progressive Alliance of Social Democrats are 5 MEPs from Austria, who are actually represented by Andreas Schieder as their head of delegation. Evelyn Regner, in turn, is part of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee. During the plenary week, all 705 MEPs meet to vote on a number of legislative proposals. At the beginning of each vote, the respective committee chairperson gives a brief overview of the content of the legislative proposal and of the resolutions passed in the committee. During the voting, the MEPs must not be put under pressure or should not be disciplined actually by their party group. The so-called free mandate is intended to enable them to vote freely and independently, to do the best of their knowledge and belief. Also present but not entitled to vote are representatives of the respective general directorates and the Council of Ministers, represented by the current Council Presidency. In the voting, an absolute majority actually is needed to pass a Commission proposal. Here, for example, 669 votes actually has been done, and 389 votes have been in favor, so therefore it passed. It's a simple majority. Voting in the European Parliament takes place electronically, which means that the voting behavior of a member can be clearly observed, which you can see here on the screen. After the vote, there is a final vote in the Council of Ministers. Even if the formal vote has to take place in the Ministerial Council meeting of the respective ministers, many decisions have already been agreed in upstream committees. The meetings are chaired and coordinated by the current Council Presidency, which has been a trio since the Treaty of Lisbon and hands over the presidency every 6 months. These 3 countries have to agree on a working program for 1.5 years, which is closely linked to the policy priorities addressed in the 5-year working program of the Commission. Portugal currently holds the chairmanship and will hand it over to Slovenia on July 1st. The third in the trio is Germany, which already took the chair in the first half of 2020. The composition is based on the goal of bringing together as different interests as possible. Thus, populous and poorly populated countries, all the new member countries, geographical location, and the respective economic strength are taken into account in the composition of the team presidencies. It should be emphasized that the presidency's influence lies mainly in defining thematic priorities and in the way of agenda setting. Bills must be passed with a double majority. A double majority needs the approval of 55% of the member states, which together has to represent at least 65% of the population. However, it should also be emphasized that the Council of Ministers is a consensus-seeking body and therefore always aims at the approval of all member states, which actually is true in almost 85% of the cases. In the Council of Ministers, however, only 15% of the decisions are agreed and made, actually. This concerns the so-called BEAD items, which often require a larger negotiation mandate from the ministers in order to reach a positive conclusion. For example, they can agree on package solutions or side agreements. The remaining 85% of the decisions are already made and coordinated in advance between the countries. They're also called A points because they're given. They are actually not debated at the ministers' level anymore. They already agreed and only formally decided by them. The permanent representation of the 27 member states plays an essential role here. They are in close contact with the national ministries and meet weekly with the colleagues from the other member states. The permanent representation is also called COREPER, whereas COREPER 1 are the technical experts in the respective policy areas, also called attachés, and COREPER 2, they are referring to the respective deputy ambassador of a country. COREPER 1 is therefore primarily of importance for the ordinary legislative procedure. The exception is the area of justice and home affairs, which is in the responsibility of COREPER 2. At the COREPER 1 level, 15% of the decisions are made. A large part, namely 70% of the decisions, are already made at the level of the so-called Council working groups. These Council working groups form the processing of legislative proposals and discuss any amendments proposed by the European Parliament. There are currently around 150 of these Council working groups. These are composed of representatives from the national ministries and state authorities and are of technocratic manner, so to say. So they're real technocrats and no politicians. As soon as laws have been passed, they apply without restriction to the respective area after a legally agreed period. From now on, the European Commission is responsible for the administration of justice and law enforcement, and in the event of misconduct, it can initiate infringement proceedings at the European Court of Justice based in Luxembourg. As of March 2021, 1,849 proceedings are pending. 77 of these relate to Austria. The majority, however, are the late implementation of EU directives. Thank you for your interest in European policy making, and I hope that this explanatory video has helped you to get a good insight into how things work and about the key actors within the Commission, the European Parliament, and the Council of the European Union. This explanatory video is made available to you by the University of Applied Sciences of the BFE Vienna and was made possible with the kind support of the Magistraat 23 of the city of Vienna. Bernhard Zeilinger is responsible for this video, who works as a lecturer and research assistant at the study program European Economics and Business Administration, as well as at the Institute for Political Science at the University of Vienna.